Chibi-Robo for the Nintendo Gamecube is just the cutest little game. Like, you play as this tiny 10cm tall robot and make friends with the Sandersons family as you help with their house chores, performing cleanly duties like picking up litter and scrubbing the floors and witnessing mum demand a divorce in front of the children and wait, what? Chibi-Robo is a game that recently, I haven't been able to stop thinking about. A story that initially seems to be one of a robot's work ethic to help clean and cater for an ordinary suburban family, happens to actually be one about a broken home. And that same robot's meager efforts to stop a family's relationship from completely breaking down. And it's this heavy subject matter that creates a weird energy in Chibi-Robo that is both utterly bizarre and absolutely beautiful, creating an experience that looks to be aimed at children, but will probably be the most impactful for those a bit older, as this misleading story delves into themes of love, parenthood, and resentment. An experience that's honestly unlike anything that I've seen in video games before it or since. But as uncomfortable as this story can be, as we'll soon discover, what I found equally upsetting was the lack of any real discussion or wide-scale recognition around this game. Because I genuinely consider Chibi-Robo to be one of the best games of its era, leaving us with a few burning questions. How could it be that a game that was so innovative, so daring in concept, could receive little to no fanfare upon release? What exactly were the contents of this game that were considered so shocking by so many people? And perhaps most importantly, in order to put Chibi-Robo in Super Smash Bros., who is it exactly that I have to kill? So let's say we delve into why this game is deceptive, obscure, and absolutely worth your time, as we attempt to answer some of those questions by highlighting the heavy story, the unique gameplay, and the real-life scenarios that now surround this incredibly strange game series in a veil of mystique. As while this game touches on some upsetting subject matter in some really clever ways, it's also a game that admittedly should have never existed. A half-baked idea that was rescued by a titan of the industry to become something more, only for this game series to be plagued by baffling business decisions, with these strained relationships portrayed on screen bizarrely predicting that of real life, as its developers would experience a slow-burning neglect by the very same company that saved them, a tragic breakdown behind closed doors that almost guaranteed this series' demise. So I hope you'll join me, your dearest friend Paulie. I'm the only one who remembered your birthday, as we explore Chibi-Robo Plug into Adventure, the devilishly deceptive GameCube platformer that I consider no less than a pioneering cult classic. So to begin, I'd like to first talk about the team behind Chibi-Robo, Skip Limited. Made up of disbanded members from both Square and the ambitious but short-lived Lovedelic, the newly created team at Skip had initially proved to be a promising one, as the man at the helm for many of their early projects was none other than Kenichi Nishi. To give an example of the lengths this man was willing to go in the pursuit of art, during pre-production of Skip's first game titled Giftpia or Giftopia, a creatively stifled Nishi would get word of vision quests, a rite of passage in some Native American cultures in which young men on the verge of adulthood would fast for 4 days and nights, and as a result would experience mind-bending hallucinations. Nishi, upon hearing this, would travel to the Nevada desert and would fast for a day in the hopes of seeing a vision that could serve as inspiration for his upcoming game. Whether you perceive Nishi to be driven by his passionate, unbridled creativity, or maybe just his batshit insanity, what's important to know here is that Nishi would see the world through a unique lens. Fascinated by the idea of what it meant to grow up and become an adult, I think Nishi would strive to create games that would lean heavily into this childlike innocence and naivety, creating stories around the bursting of that safe bubble that happens suddenly in your adolescence. It was an uncertain, almost nervous worldview that was reflected in each and every one of these early projects. And after Giftpia's positive fan reception, Skip were looking to capture this feeling again, this time trying their hand at a point-and-click inspired title. Gaining recognition by publisher Bandai Namco, the two teams began working together to create a game starring none other than our alloy ally, Chibi-Robo. However, perhaps unaware of just how ambitious Nishi and his team were, Bandai weren't particularly happy with the direction that they were taking the game, and having missed their 2003 summer deadline, the project was put on an indefinite hiatus, leaving the understaffed and financially struggling Skip Limited treading water. Unsure of where to go from here, as an outright cancellation was looking inevitable, Skip would be approached by Shigeru Miyamoto and the lads over at Nintendo, who once again saw some potential. Having recently assisted them financially during the development of Gift Pier, Nintendo took the opportunity to allow Skip to salvage their Chibi-Robo character for a new game, as the newly inspired Nishi would finally be able to craft his initial vision. Miyamoto taking a hands-off approach, having very minimal involvement in its production. Worked on by around a dozen people, near unheard of for a Gamecube game, the small team was beginning to mold a very personal project. Still starring Chibi-Robo, but deciding to place him within an unconventional story, the subject matter of which no one could have anticipated. Upon its release, Chibi-Robo Plug-into Adventure would bring an energy that was immediately distinguishable from anything else released at the time. Its music was bombastic, its character designs outlandish, and its main character was a cleaning appliance. Unlike its competition, you weren't playing as the hero with endless charisma, nor were you controlling a player surrogate. Chibi-Robo was merely a tiny lens into a seemingly regular suburban household. The story appeared simple enough, starring the ordinary Sanderson's family, who on their daughter's birthday buys her a brand spanking new Chibi-Robo. How thoughtful. A delightfully innocent cleaning device who's immediately put to work as you begin your tidying up tasks like cleaning paw prints and gathering cookie crumbs. But it's not until Chibi-Robo dares to venture beyond the living room where the somewhat bleak narrative begins to show itself. As Chibi-Robo performs his daily tasks, it becomes apparent there's something not okay with the Sandersons. The family's daughter, Jenny, she thinks she's a frog, and having recently turned 8, it's kind of past the point of being cute. A behaviour duly noted by her increasingly resentful mother, where we quickly understand her bitterness to be a byproduct of years of shouldering responsibility, tackling the family's workload on her own as Mr. Sanderson spreads his time between his superhero toy collection and sleeping on the couch. While other platforming adventures of its time had likable characters who would converse almost exclusively in quippy one-liners, Chibi-Robo had characters that were begrudging, resentful, and frustrated that would vent at a protagonist who was just trying their best. It was a game that at times felt uncomfortable to play, a feeling of constant caution that becomes outright confusion, as when performing nightly tasks, all of the toys within the house suddenly spring to life, accompanied by a spine-chilling groan coming from the basement, begging the question, just what exactly is going on in this house? I don't think there was anything in video games, specifically at its time of release, that was telling stories like this. In 2006, the tail end of the animal platformers phenomenon and quickly approaching the first-person shooter craze, Chibi-Robo wouldn't subscribe to any particular trope or trend. It didn't look like anything on the market at the time, and nor did it play like it. Skip had strived for a blissful individuality that was evident in both its narrative and its gameplay. Platforming games often take place over a variety of locations. One might think of the old tried and true formula of platforming with a backdrop of a forest world, then water, followed by a desert, and then perhaps a lava world. It's a blueprint that has stood the test of time for good reason. Having the players traverse a variety of locations that all look, sound, and feel uniquely distinct from one another helps maintain the fantasy of an adventure, a satisfying feeling of physical progression as you conquer a planet's various landmarks. So what immediately stands out about Chibi-Robo is that his adventure entirely takes place in a singular location, and it initially appears to be quite a boring one at that, a regular suburban home. One that would usually feel restrictive and claustrophobic if we were playing as a regular-sized human, but controlling the tiny Chibi-Robo, our perspective shifts completely. A double-story house now perceived as a mountainous sandbox, dense with detail and ripe for exploration. The simple task of sitting on the couch or ascending the stairs suddenly becoming daunting, near impossible feats to ask of Chibi-Robo and his little battery. As while there are only so many rooms in this house, It's an environment that always feels exciting to explore due to how well it's designed, both as a space for Chibi-Robo to traverse and through its environmental storytelling. Rather than feeling like a level in a video game, the Sandersons' house feels like a legitimate home that a real family would live in. Not to say it's realistic, as its aesthetic is that of which I'd compare to a children's colouring book, but it's when we start to think about how the room's contents are presented that we find that sense of plausibility, as each room has been designed to contain a story about the people that inhabit it. Take Jenny's room, for example. The aggressively pink walls and scattered toys immediately telling us this is a child's bedroom, with empty cookie boxes, crumbs, and candy wrappers found under the bed, suggesting the child sneaks sweets into their room and eats them at night, hiding the evidence. And every room in the house is designed to tell little stories like this. From the abundance or lack of personal belongings, to the prominent placement of furniture, to the cracks in the windows and walls lazily covered by stickers. Everything here has been designed to tell us about these characters and their past, created with an attention to detail that can tell us far more about this family's history than any dialogue could. Like when we pass family portraits found around the house that suggest there was a time when things were good, when the family was together and everyone was happy, and how that once comfortable living situation has since become ancient history. As you witness bills and toy receipts begin to pile up around the house, a living space that becomes increasingly filthy as the game continues, as Mrs. Sanderson reaches the last straw and locks herself in her room indefinitely. A peep slot in the door allowing Chibi-Robo to squeeze into the bedroom, where we can see Mrs. Sanderson's sewing kit shoved into the corner tucked away, while there remains a dedicated shelving space for Mr. Sanderson's spotless toy collection. In fact, all of these possessions scattered throughout the house are positioned with a thought and care that isn't given to anything else, revealing where his priorities lie. And I mention this stuff because all of it could have been spoken about in a cutscene, but I think giving us the ability to discover it ourselves gives the implications of these items far more impact. Showing us this stuff as opposed to telling us allows the player just enough wiggle room to draw their own conclusions as to how these people think, allowing us to fill in the gaps of the Sandersons' history with our own theories. Chibi-Robo, and by extension the player, becoming all tied up in a rapidly declining relationship that I think you can't help but become invested in due to Chibi-Robo's excellent characters. Instantly recognizable due to their, we'll say, unique designs, Chibi-Robo's characters are also well-defined personalities. Written as substantial and believable inhabitants of this household, each member is also fleshed out to have their own aspirations, hobbies, history, and issues, coming together to create the feeling of a legitimate unit, rather than acting like individual NPCs in a game. Take Mr. Sanderson, for example. While he first appears to be fun and goofy, he can be witnessed throughout the game glued to the couch watching cartoons, barely seen interacting with either his wife or child. His naive dialogue indicating that he's completely unaware of how damaging his behaviour is to the others in the house. Unintentionally neglectful as he continues to spend his time invested in his favourite superhero, Drake Redcrest, perhaps as a form of escapism from having to deal with the fact he was just laid off from his job. And it's only when Mrs. Sanderson locks herself in her room in protest, threatening divorce, where he finally gets his acts together, hurriedly completing chores in order to win her back, telling us that he does genuinely in fact care about her. What I love about Mr. Sanderson is that he so easily could have been the surface level goofy dad trope, but was instead given the time and care to display a recognizable and authentic personality. And I think a large part of his believability, along with everyone else, comes from the fact these characters have complicated relationships with each other, rather than existing as singular characters or separated individuals for Chibi-Robo to interact with. As a comparison, while Persona 5 was my favourite game I played in 2017, I had one major issue with what was otherwise a brilliant experience. To me, it felt like your party, the Phantom Thieves, were held together by a glue that was the main character. It appeared to me if he wasn't in the picture, these characters just wouldn't be interacting, as there's never any indication that your friends are ever hanging out without you or interacting with one another in their own time. They only exist as friends when you decide everyone should get together. And to me that really hurt the believability of the Phantom Thieves as an authentic ragtag group of friends. almost as if as soon as you walk away, everyone's lives become separate and their relationships freeze in place, paused until you decide to bring them all together again, where they're then allowed to continue to interact. Comparing that back to Chibi-Robo, I think this game creates the convincing illusion that if this little robot never entered the home, this family would continue existing and interacting. Chibi-Robo is merely another relationship for each of these characters to participate in, on top of their pre-existing. Instead of being the catalyst for every character interaction that takes place, it's not hard to imagine that in this house, there are conversations happening that Chibi-Robo isn't privy to. And I mention this because I think this idea of established relationships adds an extra dimension to these characters that other platformer adventure games of its time just wasn't doing. Having character dialogue that gives both context and insight into everyone's relationships creates a much stronger picture of how these people coexist in the player's mind, adding an uncomfortable weight to the events that unfold, overall making for a far more compelling experience. And this brilliant character writing also extends to the toys. In a Toy Story-esque circumstance, many of these dolls and figures have existed within this house for a long time, and view Chibi-Robo as the new kid on the block. Each toy also being expanded upon, as most have their own dreams, history, and pre-existing relationships too, with some toys even suggesting there are power dynamics between them. Chibi-Robo assisting them all in their deep-rooted relationship issues, as they too hinted a much happier time long ago, alluding to how good things used to be, and how that's no longer the case. As a result, the feeling you experience when playing Chibi-Robo is unlike anything I can draw comparison to. At times it's engrossing, addictive, and hilarious, while other times it can be harrowing. It's a game that's about tidying up and being the best boy possible, that's really a window into an increasingly toxic relationship, having you witness these events that exclusively happen behind closed doors as an unwilling third party, positioning Chibi-Robo and the player almost like a second child within the family, carrying the burden of having to watch this all unfold. And I think this feeling of walking on eggshells occurs because a lot of what they're depicting is real. I mean, you never actually get to see any shouting matches between the parents in Chibi-Robo. Like in real life, it's much more subtle than that, capturing a side of relationships that exists, but one we don't often see in the media we consume. And not because we can't, we just don't want to. The arguments, the neglect, the resentment, it's not particularly nice to watch. And I think that feeling was something Skip was striving for. A display of a typical child's mindset where family equals happy and where love equals eternal, only to smack the player in the face with a big long reality, reminding the player that this childhood fantasy has shattered at some point in their life, and that we've all been robbed of an innocence that we can never get back. And what's fascinating to me is that when Chibi-Robo isn't shockingly melodramatic like this, it's actually really silly. It's still somehow capable of being cute and genuinely funny with a bizarre sense of humor. One second you're watching mum suggest divorce, and the next you're told to put on this frog costume. And having that breakneck 180 when playing Chibi-Robo, the stark contrast between its moments of fun and despair, mean the times where the darker themes are explored hit you that much harder, as the game affected me in a way that I wasn't necessarily prepared for, making for an experience that I can't recommend enough. An experience that unfortunately not many people got to have, bringing us to the final part of this video, the fall of Chibi-Robo. Upon release, despite positive reviews praising the game's charm and compelling story, Chibi-Robo's sales were unimpressive, and I think a large part of that had to do with its time of release. Due to the game's stunted development, for the West it wasn't until 2006 that Chibi-Robo was finally available on store shelves. To describe how late of a publication that was, at this point in time the Nintendo's new handheld, the DS, and the Xbox 360 had already been released, and both the PlayStation 3 and Nintendo Wii had been announced and were quickly approaching launch, as hype was building for the next console generation to officially kick off. A new frontier that was promising graphics that would look as realistic as ever, and motion controls designed to make you feel like you were in the game. The future of gaming was here, and Chibi-Robo was being left behind. Now, it's important to know that a late release in a console's life cycle wasn't necessarily a death sentence. The Pink Puffs games were notorious for being published later on, with Kirby's Adventure on the NES released years after the launch of the Super Nintendo, and Superstar on the SNES released mere months before the launch of the revolutionary Nintendo 64. But the difference here was that Kirby was still able to thrive as it had the backing from Nintendo to continue. Sure, Kirby wasn't the poster child, but it would still play a role as an important IP for the company, often used as a canvas for a lot of innovative and experimental game ideas throughout the years. And at the risk of sounding like a salty little fanboy, it was apparent that a similar position wasn't available for Chibi-Robo. He never even had the chance to receive that same support. And unlike Twilight Princess, released just after Chibi-Robo, designed to be available on both the Gamecube and Wii, Chibi-Robo was stuck on the console that was barreling towards irrelevancy, where he was being sold at full price. A brand new, unrecognizable IP. As one of the last games developed for a dying console, Chibi-Robo never really stood a chance. Now, it did eventually receive that Wii port, but for whatever reason, perhaps due to fears that it would perform just as terribly, it remained a Japan exclusive, kicking off somewhat of a trend of unexplainable business decisions for our pocket-sized robot. As Chibi-Robo, seemingly against all odds, received a sequel in 2007 for the much more popular Nintendo DS. Now given a bigger platform and released at the right time, people would finally be able to see what Chibi-Robo was all about. Except, in a decision I'm still trying to get my head around, Chibi-Robo Park Patrol was released in North America as a Walmart exclusive, while Europeans didn't even get the game. It didn't help that Park Patrol was just okay. Receiving mixed reviews, it would stray away from the design and premise of the original, largely due to Kenichi Nishi having no involvement here in its sequel. It's still unknown whether Nishi declined to direct it, or if the call was made by Nintendo, as Nintendo producer Kensuke Tanabe would specifically request the team at Skip take a different, more appealing approach to this sequel, emphasizing, "I am asking them to aim at establishing a game system where the game's emphasis is on freedom and enjoyable gameplay, rather than the game events." One could speculate that Nintendo were perhaps taken aback by the direction of the original, possibly disapproving of the game's use of story-focused cutscenes and dialogue. Perhaps one of the first indications that there were cracks beginning to show in the relationship between Skip and Nintendo, as during this game's development, Nishi would leave Skip forever. However, having sold modestly, it appeared Park Patrol had made enough of a buzz that 2 years later in 2009, Chibi-Robo was primed for a third game that returned to the roots of the series. It was much more of a true sequel to the original, as the game would focus around Chibi-Robo cleaning the house of a now grown-up Jenny. Finally, things were looking up for our little hero, only to be confirmed the game would be another Japan exclusive. As for Western fans, came radio silence. Years and years of nothing. During this time, it was difficult to assume that Nintendo viewed Chibi-Robo as anything other than a failed series that no one cared about. And with each year passing containing no news of a return, a lot of us started to think they were right. For Western fans, 7 years would pass before getting word of another possible Chibi-Robo game, the little robot returning in the most unlikely of ways, resurfacing from what many assumed was an eternal slumber, now on the 3DS as an eShop exclusive. Starring in the 2014 augmented reality game Chibi-Robo Photo Finder. Designed to show off the 3DS's AR capabilities, it was a game that was about as exciting as it sounds. Chibi-Robo no more than a sticker to be slapped onto this tech demo at the end of its development to help sell downloads. I really wish I could end the story here. Pretend that there wasn't another Chibi-Robo game, if only to save myself the breath and save Skip the embarrassment. Because a year later, in 2015, Chibi-Robo was given what seemed to be one last chance. It was announced that Chibi-Robo would be receiving a platformer on the 3DS. Myself and the 6 other Chibi-Robo fans cautiously optimistic, as Nintendo would declare that the sales of this game would essentially determine Chibi-Robo's future. Not that you would have known this game was even coming out. There was next to zero marketing surrounding this title, much like the games that came before it. And for those that did pick up the game, what they received was a subpar 2D platformer. Lifeless, by-the-numbers mediocrity disguised as Chibi-Robo Ziplash. Upon release, the game would receive no mainstream attention, and its deservedly average reception by reviewers all but sealed Chibi-Robo's fate. Not only was this game a disappointment, it was such a flop that if you are currently interested in owning a Chibi-Robo amiibo, you can find listings on both eBay and Amazon where it would be cheaper to purchase the amiibo that's bundled with this game than on its own. And with that, squashed any hope of a return in the foreseeable future. As of this moment in time, I don't know if we'll ever get another Chibi-Robo game. Too many things went wrong, too many mistakes were made, and there were still so many questions surrounding Skip themselves. A company who's still around in 2020, but no one's really sure if they even make games anymore. And while I shared my own theories surrounding them and their relationship with Nintendo, like many others on the internet before me, it's important to know there's no hard proof for any of this. It's something I genuinely believe will remain a mystery, at least in my lifetime. Perhaps in that sense I shouldn't have speculated, but I was feeling particularly frisky today. So while it would be easy to dismiss Chibi-Robo as a swing and a miss for Nintendo in an attempt to develop a new series, I still choose to view the original as a once-in-a-generation kind of game. Chibi-Robo Plug-in Adventure and the creative team responsible for it had a beating heart, which is why it's such a shame that Chibi-Robo never got to thrive or adapt. It's stuck in the past. And that's okay, as the original remains so authentic in a way that many other games just aren't, and I hope I was able to convey here why that is. And should you want to play it, I understand it would be ridiculous of me to ask you to go out and buy a now absurdly expensive game from 2006, so I'll just turn around and let you do what you have to do. I think Chibi-Robo could have, and arguably should have, been a game that defined a generation. Further proof that this medium could discuss mature and confronting themes in interesting ways that we've never seen before. Stories of identity and relationships and the struggle that follows when both of those things are brought into question. Kenichi Nishi and the talented team at Skip doing it way before anyone else even dared to go near that kind of stuff. A venture that seemed thankless in the beginning, but one that's finally starting to make some waves as a passionate cult following is slowly but surely building around this little Gamecube game. The community proving to be a rabid and passionate one, evident as the Japan-exclusive DS game received an English fan patch in 2015. It seems if Nintendo won't recognize him, the heart of Chibi-Robo will lie in the people. So consider this me doing my little part. Because while I don't see an official resurgence happening anytime soon, as long as this game is placed on the pedestal it deserves, well then, I'll be just fine with that. Thanks for watching.